Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 303 of the podcast. It's March 28th, 2018. Joining me today is Craig Deao, a senior leader with Studer Group. Since 2006, Craig has been an integral part of their organization as the senior leader for their speaking and conferences teams. And he now directs thought leadership across Huron Consulting Group's broader healthcare practice. Huron acquired Studer Group some time back. Craig is a highly regarded national speaker on leadership, engagement, quality, and patient safety. He works with medical staffs and healthcare executives to create highly reliable organizations where employees want to work, where physicians want to practice, and patients want to receive care. Today we're talking about his book, The E Factor: How Engaged Patients, Clinicians, Leaders, and Employees Will Transform Healthcare. We'll talk about the differences between satisfaction and engagement, how to tell if people are engaged in their work, and how to engage various stakeholders, including employees, clinicians, and executives. And we'll also talk about how Studer Group became a recipient of the Malcolm Baldridge National Quality Award in 2010. And in the interest of disclosure, last year I became a speaker through Studer Group in addition to my other work and roles, so I do have a working relationship with them. But I've enjoyed getting to know Craig and to have the chance to share the stage with him, and I hope you will enjoy the conversation here today. For links to everything that we discussed here, you can go to leanblog.org/303. Craig, hi. Thank you for being a guest here on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So to kick things off, I may let you introduce yourself. Maybe tell the listeners a little bit about your career path, what led you to your leadership role with Studer Group.
Sure. So I've been fortunate to serve as a senior leader in the Studer Group for the past 12 years. I guess to rewind the clock on the career, I grew up in New Orleans, thought I wanted to eventually become a hospital CEO, which is after realizing I didn't want to be a doctor, which is a whole other podcast discussion,
Mm-hmm.
and still just had a great affinity and love for making an improvement in that industry. Received my master's in health administration and decided to pursue a career that was a bit circuitous and exposing me to a lot of background in quality and patient safety improvement, which is probably my first love within healthcare, and led to the opportunity to be the R&D leader for Studer Group, and that merged into a really neat blended role now where I'm about half the time in the field writing, speaking, and half the time helping to operate different aspects of our organization.
Yeah. So where, there might be, like you said, a longer story to that, but where did the passion or the fire for healthcare develop?
Very early in life. So, in fact, I remember being, 6 or 7 years old and going to my pediatrician's office and being so fascinated that there was this waiting area full of other kids that he could help. And there was something about that helping and making other lives better that just really fired me up. And, the physician was the archetype of that for me, and it still is in a lot of ways, but it was the only job I knew that existed. I had the opportunity to shadow physicians, learn from physicians, volunteer hundreds of hours in hospitals and physician practice. And somewhere along the line, realized that there was even, more opportunities there that better fit my skills, and evolved into this role that I certainly as a 6-year-old never would have envisioned existed.
Can you talk a little bit also, I think Studer Group is unique and stands out as being a recipient of the Malcolm Baldridge National Quality Award. And, I've previously talked to guests on the podcast, Mary Greeley Medical Center organization in Iowa that, has won the state level Baldridge and is working on the national level. I've talked about the Baldridge process in previous podcasts, but can you talk about that process and what that meant for you and Studer Group pursuing and achieving that level of Baldridge recognition?
Oh, absolutely. It's got to be on the short list of things I'm most honored to have been part of and learned in my career. So I guess I'll start with why we pursued that, and to talk a little bit more about our organization. Studer Group was founded in the late 90s by Quint Studer, who had earned a reputation from helping to turn around two healthcare organizations where he was one of the executives. And his approach to doing that was very much honoring the people. So it was about engaging the employees and the physicians, really help reconnecting them to why they pursued these careers in the first place, which sounds awfully soft and basic, but with the epidemic of burnout that we have and the hard jobs, it's amazing how much energy that unlocks. It can be a bit dormant. And then coupling them with really good systems and processes that are, to use some lean language, sort of standard work. And so in the early 2000s, we were a privately held organization and achieving really good success, coaching organizations to help them achieve their results. And we noticed that many of our partners ended up becoming the early recipients of the Baldridge Award. In fact, one of those facilities that Quint led was one of the first healthcare recipients. And as a coach to those groups, we have a saying that you can't take somebody further than you've taken yourself. And so we thought that in the spirit of authenticity, we should eat our own cooking and pursue that same level of excellence. And so in 2006, I joined the firm. The leaders who were there had already turned in their first application at the state level. And we received the same moment of humility that everyone does, probably that first application, of thinking like, oh yeah, right. We're gonna win the record and get this on the first entry. And it was feedback that kind of hits you between the eyes. And so 4 years later, we were fortunate enough to have improved sufficiently to be named a recipient, and that's really been an honor. It's a neat club of organizations that we're in, not just as recipients, but more importantly, of those who just strive to compare themselves to those criteria, because it's an impossibly high standard of excellence. It's wonderfully instructive.
Well, and it seems like everyone talks about the improvement that comes through the process of pursuing that. I don't know if anyone has ever reached that pinnacle on their first attempt, right? It leads to, I'm sure, all sorts of eye-opening moments and opportunities for improvement along the way, right?
It really does. I mean, there's many things I love about that distinction, but one is that it is such a catalyst for more change. It's not the thing that sparks a leadership team to want to change, because you wouldn't even be open to this if you weren't really looking to get to the top of the mountain. But it's the thing that really fuels the journey when you realize how you're performing against really best practice standards of excellence. And I think it helped align our team. The basic questions about how we're organized and how we operate, I looked at the questions and thought, I know the answer to that. Well, turns out those weren't the same as my very small executive team colleagues of, a handful of us answered. We were pretty divergent. And so just to answer those questions, to understand the baseline of who we are, was really eye-opening, and then let alone how we're going to get better.
Well, so I want to switch and talk a little bit about your book, The E Factor, since you mentioned engagement and sometimes the opportunity to try to address burnout or, restart the fire inside people. One question I always like to ask authors, what led to writing the book? What was the spark that led to you doing that?
Great question. Well, in this case, it started with an observation that we had in our organization, and we saw many that we served have. So if you think about employee engagement, in the 90s, that was employee satisfaction. And we saw that there was an awareness through better analytics and better really understanding of how organizations function, that satisfaction is necessary, but it's insufficient when it comes to producing and sustaining results. And engagement is far more purposeful in tying the feedback of employees and their view of the organization back to results. So we had made the pivot from thinking about satisfaction to engagement inside the organization. Most of the healthcare and education leaders that we serve had done the same, but they hadn't yet made that leap with their customers. And in fact, I think we're still in that case. In fact, even the word customer is, a dirty word when it's in healthcare, but it's the same difference. Satisfaction and experience are often conflated to be the same thing, but they're actually really quite distinctive. And that was the point of the book, was to use the parallel of employee and physician engagement to start really introducing this brand new concept of patient or consumer engagement.
How would you explain the difference between the terms? I came to some recognition, maybe in parallel along the way, where people who know my book Lean Hospitals might have noticed that in the subtitle for the first edition I used the word satisfaction, and in the second and third editions that word is engagement. I've got my thoughts, but I'm curious from your perspective, why is that an important distinction?
Well, I think that's a wonderful evolution of your own thinking on it too, and it's certainly something mine has evolved on. I guess a few ways to approach this. One, the simplest might be that I view satisfaction as a one-way street, and engagement's a two-way street. So satisfaction is about measuring how much I like what I'm getting from you. Engagement's about how much I'm giving back. And so whether it's about how an employee views their employer and workplace and organization, or it's how a patient views their healthcare provider, satisfaction's important. I need to know if you're satisfied. That's always a good predictor of market share and growth, and whether you're producing a product that people value. But it's not the same as engagement. On the employee side, that might be what happens when nobody's watching, and giving value back and being emotionally invested in that organization. I can be, probably the other simple example I use on the employee side about how different engagement and satisfaction are is to consider if I'm a 8 to 5 employee and I want to leave today at 3 o'clock to go spend some time with my kids, and you say, sure, Craig, go ahead and take those 2 hours off. I'm very satisfied with that. I'd rate my satisfaction with that a 10. But how engaged am I in the pursuit of that organization's mission the next 2 hours? Not at all. I'm home playing with my children. So I could be 100% satisfied and 0% engaged at the same time. And on the patient side, similarly, I can be very satisfied with the care I'm receiving and be very non-committed and disconnected from actually doing the things that I need to do to improve my own health care, like lose weight, stop smoking, exercise, take that medication to completion, challenge the physician if it's supposed to be a blue pill and I got a white pill. And all of that is what we need to do if we're going to address the 40% of deaths and 75% of costs that come from largely modifiable health conditions that can't be fixed just through medications alone. So I think it's a higher order measure of the relationship between the individual and the group or others providing service. I'm curious on your view too, since you've come to the same conclusion, probably looking at different facts and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I agree with you when you say satisfaction is more a measure of happiness, and that I think that's one outcome. But like you said, engagement is more, I think, not just a measure, but a process of commitment to the organization. And I agree with you. It's a two-way street. I think employees, engaged employees are often the result of leaders who are engaged with the organization and are actively engaging the employees. I think of engaging as a verb, not just a noun. And sometimes I'll hear people complain, leaders complain about, let's say, look at different stakeholders as you write about in the book, a lack of physician engagement. And I think the fair follow-up question, being careful with the tone, and then how it's asked is, well, what are you doing to engage the physicians? I think that's a fair question.
Well, and it's so fun. Words are fascinating to me. The noun and the verb of engage is great. One of the things that I learned from Dr. Judith Hibbard, who studies patient activation and patient engagement, probably more intensively than anybody else I've met. She makes it really clear that if you're a healthcare practitioner and you're trying to influence health outcomes, you have to first understand that you really can't engage anybody. That's only something that the individual can do. So I can't make you become engaged. I can't engage you, but I can create an environment that facilitates you engaging. And that's the role of the leader with that physician or frankly, the teacher with the student, any of those sorts of relationships that we can't make anybody change. That's something that's got to be intrinsically rooted if it's going to stick. And at the same time, we can highly influence it. And sort of getting to that level of like, okay, well, that means I'm not necessarily responsible for the 2% that we're never going to engage here. We have to have a different strategy there. But for the 98%, we see tremendous variation in the same organization on engagement, unit by unit, leader by leader. So same constraints, resources, budget challenges, and the rest. Yet the people who work in Mary's area are a lot more engaged than the people who work in Tom's area. And it almost always comes down to, you've helped me understand it's sort of that standard work of leadership that's just not diffused, deployed, and connected back to the individual.
Yeah. So let's say, looking at, employees or clinicians, other than taking surveys, I mean, what are some of the things you would look for? How would you tell if there's a high level of engagement, or is that something even individual by individual? How do you tell if an individual is engaged?
Right. Well, I mean, even with those surveys, so even before, if you're going to give out an employee engagement survey and you don't tell me the results or the key drivers, but you just tell me how many people took the survey, I can probably predict directionally if it's going to come back as engaged or not, because a marker of engagement is, do I share my voice and opinion? Am I leaning in? Am I giving discretionary effort? Am I volunteering for things? Am I bringing solutions? Am I, rethinking sort of the orthodoxy and traditional ways of doing things and pushing the envelope? Or am I just perfunctorily performing the job? And so, I think that too often there's this push to have conformity and accountability with the practice. And, hey, if something's totally rules-based, evidence-based, best practice, no doubt about it, then, super. There's a lot of good that can come from that probably in the short term. But so much of what most of our industries are facing is never been seen before. There is no rule book, and that requires innovation and fresh approaches. And I don't know how you get to that without first having somebody who's engaged, who wants to lift their head up and go find a new way. And that requires that engagement, condition to exist before the new ways will be even contemplated. That involves risk-taking and all kind of, other things that you have to feel safe to do.
So I like the way you put that a couple of minutes ago, talking about leaders creating an environment in which engagement can happen rather than forcing the issue. So would you say then, let's say, if you come into an organization and there's a lack of engagement, let's say employees would agree, people here aren't very engaged. Leaders might be complaining about that. What are some of the recommended first steps? I mean, does it start with leaders? What are some of the first steps to create that environment if it doesn't exist?
Yeah, I mean, we can go about it two ways. Certainly, given the opportunity, having leaders role model and coach these behaviors is the long-term answer. And so certainly in our work, it's a non-negotiable when we are engaged that we need to be engaged by senior leadership who are willing to role model and coach these behaviors themselves and not ask others to do something that they're not going to model. Now, so while I believe that is the right answer, and I think there's a lot of evidence behind that, the challenge then is, well, okay, good, but I'm not the chairman of the board to be able to make that change. I'm running my microsystem within this area, and I want to create excellence there. And so I think the really interesting question about this is, how do you do it when those conditions aren't optimal at the top? And, I think that's a lot of making sure that you understand how to position what's in it for them in every sort of, thing you're trying to advance. It's about holding up the mirror and making sure that you're owning your end of the street before you point fingers up. And I think there's a process to go through of discovery on that. But long term, I don't know of a lot of organizational examples where there's sustained excellence at a Baldridge-like level that does not include senior leadership who role model and coach those behaviors themselves.
Yeah, and I've always kind of wondered or suspected, for an organization to really make progress with lean or on the Baldridge journey, or going down the process as a partner with Studer Group. It seems like there's some minimum required starting point, some minimum level of engagement. Without that, there's maybe not a lot of hope of making great progress. And now as I'm saying that, it sounds kind of self-defeating or a catch-22 that you can't increase engagement without already having some engagement. Can you unravel what I'm babbling about into something more useful, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe, as you're talking, the word that comes to mind for me is a sense of urgency. And I flip back to John Cotter's I think, deep wisdom on this, that change and transformation will not occur if they don't progress through the 8 known steps of transformation. Step 1 is always to have a sense of urgency. And you have a sense of urgency once 75% of leaders honestly believe that business as usual is no longer acceptable. Mm-hmm. And then you have a small, powerful enough guiding coalition to go make the change. And so knowing all that, when I meet organizational leaders that are, contemplating change, so something has to spark that. That's certainly the case. Something had to spark the interest in the discussion. There's sort of, and this is way too binary to reflect all the gray, but there's sort of 2 conditions that present themselves for us. One is that there are people who are running from a bear. They have a clear and present threat to their success as individuals, or more likely as an organization. Days cash is short, quality is bad. Something happened in the marketplace, a competitor's moved in, results are declining. And there's some external impetus for those individuals that are running from that bear. Then there's another group of leaders that are running to the gold, and the bears are behind them. They're not fleeing from anything. They're chasing something that's more aspirational. And we've worked with both. I say that it's really interesting to work with those that have faced some of the clear and present challenges and now are looking to set the bar for the future. But in any case, there is some catalyst for the conversation and the urgency that has to happen. It can either be extrinsic or extrinsic. It can be aspirational for growth and improvement, or it can be to try to be restorative from avoiding a loss.
Kind of stepping back and thinking about different stakeholders, between patients, clinicians, leaders, employees. Is there one of those stakeholder groups where you tend to see the biggest engagement gap? Does it depend on the circumstances? What do you see as the biggest engagement challenges in healthcare?
Well, all 4 are challenged, no doubt about it. And I think all 4 together is the only way we're really going to transform as an industry. Where we have statistics, and we don't have good statistics on all of them, but Gallup would tell you that only 13% of workers on the planet are fully engaged in their jobs, which is kind of mind-boggling. Every time I hear that, I'm thinking, well, let's just go back to the age of the craftsman. Like, forget me making the legs of the stool and you making the chairs. Because that assumes that 1 + 1 = 3. We're just going to go back to building the whole darn thing ourselves and be craftsmen again. It's like the tombstone for modern day organizational theory, that individuals come together to create something bigger. So, that's definitely an issue. The industries that I have been privileged to serve in, mostly healthcare, a bit in education, certainly have double, triple the rates of engagement, but still not nearly what we need to achieve the goals. Physicians, similarly, actually engagement's a bit higher than those stats, but burnout is maybe the other end of that coin, and it's just epidemic with more than half the physicians practicing right now experiencing, clinically defined burnout. And so as dramatic as those are, I believe the bigger opportunity is with us as healthcare consumers or customers or patients, or whatever word you want to use. And the data on measuring this is just emerging. But if you look at proxies for low engagement, then you look at things like the fact that a handful of chronic diseases that are largely modifiable based on mostly smoking, exercise, and diet drive 40% of costs and 40% of deaths and 75% of costs. And as healthcare as an industry and a profession shifts from being, in the United States, we're the world's best at rescue care, but we're in the bottom tier when it comes to preventative care. All of the health reform efforts are about shifting that priority. I don't think there's a way to really shift that without tackling this engagement issue.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm really passionate about closing that. I think I don't know quantitatively if it's the biggest gap, but I think it's the most important one to solve. And I think, frankly, increasing engagement of healthcare leaders, employees, and clinicians is part of that answer to help flip the whole model with our patients and consumers. But at the end of the day, the big outcome is to engage us as health consumers better.
Well, and it seems like the different surveys that you might get as a patient, HCAHPS scores, all of that is really measuring satisfaction, not engagement. Is that fair to say?
I think there's 3 points on that line continuum. So 20 years ago, the only word and the only surveys we had were satisfaction surveys. Did you, how would you rate this hospital overall? Is it excellent, very poor? And that's kind of the rating scale for everything else. Right now, those, HCAHPS, the Hospital Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Providers and Systems, and there's a version for physician groups and other things as well. Those aren't quite satisfaction surveys. They're a bit more sophisticated, and as a quality safety guy, they're really quality surveys. They're asking not how satisfied you are, but how often, never, sometimes, usually, or always, you observe some evidence-based practice happening. So how often did you did the nurses communicate with you in a way that you clearly understood, or feel prepared to care for yourself at home, or understand the side effects of medications? Those questions were all very carefully researched as ones that patients could rate very accurately and that correlated with other measures of quality. So it's a very different than a satisfaction survey. It's an experience survey that correlates with quality, and neither of those are engagement. And so the best example for an engagement survey is the patient activation measure, which is a 10-item questionnaire you or I could take that asks us our beliefs about our role in health. And the results, with I think about 200 peer-reviewed published articles now, are quite remarkable in how nicely that predicts things like readmissions, how well you are using preventative tests and treatments, and appropriate utilization of services. And maybe most interesting on the cost issue is that it's a great predictor of how expensive I am to the health system next year. So it's a prospective indicator of cost. So whether you're excited about quality or cost, and in healthcare we've got to do both because those together are value, knowing the engagement level of the person in front of me is critical to knowing how to adapt the care and create a context that supports their engagement.
So, patient engagement, seems to be really critical, getting people, patients, customers even, if you will, participating actively in, decisions about their health. I've got a friend of mine who's very active in the e-patient movement, the engaged patient movement.
Yeah.
Of trying to encourage more collaboration with healthcare providers instead of just being a passive receiver of advice or dictates about health. So I agree that's a really interesting frontier. I want to ask one other question about different stakeholder group leaders or executives. I hear a lot of people, and I imagine a lot of the listeners of the podcast here are in this situation where, they're internal process improvement people. They're in the middle of the organization. They've been given some level of mandate to go help transform the organization. And then, the people in the middle are then trying to engage their leaders to get their leaders actively participating. And I guess long story short, there are complaints about it being difficult to engage executives on topics related to lean, quality, patient safety improvement, what have you. Do you have advice for those people of how they might better engage their leaders and executives?
Well, I'd first start by acknowledging the problem. It's absolutely what challenges, frustrates, and frankly burns out a lot of people who work in process improvement, especially. So I guess two thoughts. One, I'd start by saying thank you to all of you out there who have accepted the mantle of responsibility that comes with leadership. I really believe that we need to elevate leadership as its own profession. It is an optional thing that people take on in their life that rarely has to do, certainly in healthcare, with the prestige and the salary that comes along with it. Mm-hmm. It's that we want to make a bigger impact, and we've realized that I can do that so much as an individual contributor, but I can do it a lot more if I can better set the agenda and marshal the resources. So first, thanks for that. And I guess there's a lot to unpack about why a leader may not be, quote, on the bus with a particular initiative. But the first one I really look at is how well they've communicated the benefit of the change you're proposing and the way you're proposing it in a way that lines up with that person's agenda and the words they're looking to hear. So, for example, at the early stage of my career in quality and safety, I worked with a lot of really impassioned nurses, especially, who were trying to make changes in the interest of patient safety and had never learned to do a cost-benefit analysis or a return on investment calculation. And even if there's not the financial case to make, there's the harm reduction case to make, or the lives saved case to make, or the quality of life case to make. And being able to convey to senior leaders how there's a return, even if it's not a financial return on that investment, and how it helps achieve one of their goals is critical. And the goals aren't necessarily just organizational goals, but you say yes to marshal resources as a leader when it either advances an organizational goal or a personal win. And personal wins are the harder ones to uncover. They don't show up on the dashboard, but they're the thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and makes you want to do this job for 20 years. It might be about leaving a legacy. It might be about excellence for excellence sake. It might be because it's the right thing to do. But learning what that is for your leader and then tuning your message to hit that, I think, significantly increases the likelihood of acceptance. And sometimes it's just, you need that Rosetta Stone of language to be able to connect. So that probably explains 5% of the cause, but I think it's a big one that I see.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a great point. What I hear you saying is, executives are. Sometimes people in healthcare say, whether it's completely true or not, every patient is unique. I guess we could say every executive is unique. And what I hear you saying reminds me of what W. Edwards Deming used to say in the day, that in the other direction, leaders need to understand that their employees are unique individuals and different employees are motivated by different things. And a good leader comes to understand that. It seems like the same would be true in reverse, that people who are effective get to know hopefully they get a chance to know their executives, but to understand what motivates them.
Yeah. Well, and there's ways to unpack that. I mean, where are they spending their time? Who do they hang out with and why? How do they structure their agendas? What's the airtime given to? When they write, what kind of words are they really gravitating towards that are their signatures? You sort of step back and look at the meta-analysis of all those themes, you can start getting to it. But I'll tell you, having been privileged to serve now as a senior leader in our organization, one of the most fun rare things that happens is when somebody who may not even be a direct report of mine, but more junior in the company on the org chart asks to spend time with me one-on-one to ask me those questions directly. It is so fun and really kind of surprising. I think people want to be very differential and respectful of your time, but I love when somebody pulls me aside and says, I'd love to get your perspective on this project I'm working on and how you'd see it, and is it worthwhile, and get some mentoring advice. And by the way, if you use the word mentoring, I mean, that's tugging at the purpose for a lot of us in healthcare. The answer to that is yes, I'd love to mentor you. And even if the selfish objective is because I want to get this project approved, ask me some questions about me and my perspectives and get to the project, you're singing the right song.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it comes back to that same question of what are you doing to engage your leaders? It seems like that's a versatile question. I mean, I think it's a two-way street. I think leaders have a responsibility. I don't know, hopefully I'm not twisting your words, but leaders have a responsibility to create an environment in which people can engage them. Is that too circular?
Yes. It's perfect. No, you have, as a leader, particularly as a senior leader, you have a responsibility to create the conditions for engagement. So you have to have a mission, vision, and values that retract and attain a certain type of individual with shared values. You have to have pay and benefits that don't make this volunteer work alone. You have to have role modeling of behaviors that shows people you're serious about it. And by the way, supervisors have a much bigger effect than senior leaders. So after all that's true, then the day-to-day experience is all about supervisors, right? People join organizations and quit bosses. And so what you are looking for out of that are typically things like really good, solid communications, clearly understood expectations about how success will be measured and feedback along the way, opportunities for development, both professionally, personally, financially. And the one that's forgotten a lot is just, I would say, humility and authenticity. People just want to have some connection to you as a human being. And it's easy to miss that. But I'll tell you, in our work around engagement, if, I'm only so motivated by money and goal achievement. I'm highly motivated because I like that person and don't want to let them down. And that's such a more powerful set of motivators. Or I love this mission and I love our customers and I intrinsically feel the good that comes of it. And these numbers are a nice proxy measure for achievement, but really you got to sort of get past the numbers and see what they're really telling you. And if they're telling you that this person, you can impact a life and make them feel better driving home at night or whatever it is, that's really influential.
So final topic here before we wrap up. I think, hopefully everyone listening would agree that engagement is an important goal and outcome for Lean. It's obviously something Studer Group, focuses on and helps people with. Regular listeners of the podcast might remember back to December, episode 294, we had a great conversation with your colleague Clay Linkus from Studer Group talking about connections between Lean and Studer principles. And I would invite people to go find that episode for a deeper dive into the topic. But I'm curious your thoughts on connections, overlap, how Lean and Studer Group principles are complementary. What are your thoughts on this?
So if you're interested in that topic, definitely listen to Clay's podcast with you. And anything that we say in conflict, Clay is right and I am wrong. That's a disclaimer I'll give before I attempt any of this, because he's certainly more versed on both sides than my balance has been. But Mark, I've been fortunate to go through training with you, and we've stayed in touch over the years. And so a lot of my understanding of this intersection comes through our dialogue over the years. So a few things. One, I would say that there's very little, if any, dissonance between the approaches. There's different words and there's different tools in the toolkit, but the principles that underpin this are very consistent. Honoring the expertise of the person who does the job, harnessing, enabling them to solve challenges. I often say that when I'm asked if there's 2 or 3 things you can do as a leader to facilitate engagement, one is to remember that your job isn't to do the job for the team. Your job is to build their capacity to do the job. And nobody fights their own ideas. And so if you use the many excellent tools in the Lean toolkit to help people solve problems, identify true root causes, and help them implement effective solutions, there's this sense of pride and of ownership that comes from that that's so durable. And it's a far better way to lead than the top-down, you must. And I guess the phrase you've helped me really understand over the past couple of years is this, that what we've identified from practical application are a whole lot of pieces of standard work for leadership that are packaging together a lot of evidence-based approaches. So, for example, rounding for outcomes, one of the most prominent practices we teach, we developed it because we looked at what Gallup has learned about the drivers of engagement and thought, well, gosh, rather than wait to find out how the employees rate that every year, shouldn't we have a conversation about that between every leader and every direct report as often as we can? And so you could have an approach that says, okay, everyone, here's a binder of evidence on that. Figure out your own way of doing it. And of course, you're going to get a ton of variation, and there might be some good that comes of that, and there's going to be a whole lot of failed attempts or inefficiencies. But we've coached 1,000 organizations, hundreds of thousands of leaders to adopt rounding for outcomes, which takes 30 minutes once a month and addresses all of the key drivers of typical engagement, and very compactly accelerates those results. And so I think that's the sort of a couple of areas of intercept.
And Studer Group has also in recent years been doing this type of work in education. It's probably worth pointing out.
Yeah, K-12, higher ed. And what's really fun, I mean, we feel so fortunate with the company we keep. So I think we have a team of 15 professionals dedicated to K-12 and higher education, 7 of whom are PhDs, and 1 of whom is a superintendent of a Baldridge recipient school district in the last few years. And so you just sort of see the same principles apply. And there's a whole lot more universality in these concepts than distinction by industry.
Yeah. Well, engaging teachers, engaging students, I could see a lot of parallels. And I think, we're in agreement. There's a certain universal nature of these principles, and from my first reading of Quint Studer's book Hardwiring Excellence, I was drawn to it not just because there are similarities, but I think there's some language and approaches from the Studer Group circles that I think are good additions to our lean practice. This idea of evidence-based leadership certainly appeals to people in healthcare who are used to talking about evidence-based management. And, I would certainly encourage listeners who are working in healthcare who have, kind of the hardcore lean background to also go check out not just Quint's book, but Craig's book, The E Factor, which you can find through the Studer Group website, through Amazon. So as we're wrapping up here, Craig, I want to thank you for sharing a lot of I think a lot of great insights on the practice of engagement, not just the outcome of engagement. A lot of good tips. If people want to either contact you or learn more about Studer Group, how would you recommend they go online or reach out?
Oh, thanks for asking. So our website is studergroup.com, STUDER. My email address ends with @studergroup.com, and it's just my first last name before that. So Craig.Deao @studergroup.com. And maybe the easiest thing these days is LinkedIn. That's like the professional version of Facebook. And I'm the only Craig Deao out there. So if you type in DEAO and find a Craig, I'd love to connect with you in that sphere as well.
All right. Well, thank you for taking time. I'm glad we could do the podcast here, Craig. And again, I'll encourage people to go check out the book. It's titled The E Factor: How Engaged Patients, Clinicians, Leaders, and Employees Will Transform Healthcare. Craig, thank you so much for telling us about your work and these ideas today.
It's been an honor. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For Lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.